How's everyone doing today? Great. So welcome to Moving Federal Services Online. In our presentation today, we'll be discussing some best practices that your teams can apply when moving an offline process or service to an online platform. My name is Dawn. I am a project manager and certified Scrum Master at Faro. I lead our company's interactive projects for trade associations, nonprofits, and corporate clients. And for the federal program that we'll be discussing today, I lead their Section 508 testing process for the program's website that they use to communicate to their external stakeholders.
Hi, I'm Katie. I'm also a project manager at Faro. I also work on various interactive projects in the trade association, private, and public sector worlds. On this particular federal client's project, I work on the website and do interactive project management for this account as well.
Hi, I'm Chris. Can you hear me? I feel like the mic's so far away from me. I'm the senior developer at Faro. I'm the technical lead on the project that we'll be talking about today. I also sort of help lead development on a few of our other client projects at Faro.
So we all work at Faro. Faro is a communications agency located in downtown Washington, D.C. Our clients include federal programs, corporations, nonprofits, and trade associations. And we're a team of communications specialists, project managers, developers, and designers. And we help our clients enhance their reputation, expand their audience's reach, and also influence public opinion and policy. So, quick overview of today's session. We're going to be discussing 5 best practices that we applied when moving a federal law enforcement's program's offline process to an online self-service digital platform. The key takeaways that we share today can be used by all roles that are involved in building digital solutions for their clients. So that includes product managers, project managers, UX professionals, content strategists, and we'll also have key takeaways for federal employees that are interested or thinking about moving an offline process or service to an online platform. All right, great. So let's get into the challenge. So a unit within the federal program that we work with requested that we move an offline process to an existing Drupal website. At the time of the request, this offline process was email-based. So whenever a customer would submit an application to this particular program, they would have to submit that application by email. And the customer would receive like an automatic reply from the email address saying that their application had been received. And within that email, they would also receive information about that particular process, the timeline for each phase within that process, and just a little bit more information. If a customer wanted to know what their status was within that process or to check their case status, at the time they would have to email that program directly. And the goal of moving this offline process to an online existing Drupal website was to automate it, so that when customers submitted their application, the program would send them a unique tracking ID. They would use that tracking ID to check their case status and learn more about the process. And if needed, they could reach out to the program in particular if they had additional questions about their case. So when working with this particular program unit to develop this tool, there were a few challenges that we had to find solutions for. The first challenge was this was a direct request from the program director, so the project would have high visibility. But when working with the program director, he had a really busy schedule, so we knew we were not going to get a lot of face time with him. So being able to articulate the goals and vision of the product that the program director wanted was going to be really important and crucial in order to build a product that would be intuitive and also really helpful for the customers. The second challenge that we faced was that this was the first time our team had worked with this particular program unit. So we had to learn about their structure, how they communicated with each other, as well as how they worked together to implement this process and how they work with their customers. And in addition to learning about how this particular unit worked, we also didn't have that much experience with this process that they wanted to move online. And this process was multi-step, and this process also involved stakeholders that worked internally within the program as well as externally with the program. So internally, not only was this program unit involved with the process, but other units that were involved in adjudication and compliance would also touch the process at multiple touch points. And then in terms of external stakeholders, you had the customers that were submitting an application, but you also had other units within this particular agency, such as the Office of Congressional Relations, who would submit inquiries on behalf of customers. And then finally, this new self-service platform had to be built on an existing Drupal website. So it had to fit within the existing Drupal website, and it couldn't change the security posture of the site. And then we also had to keep in mind PII and making sure that no personally identifiable information about the customers that were submitting applications would be revealed with the new tool. So with that in mind, how were we able to solve for these challenges? Well, our team implemented 5 solutions, which we're going to run through today. Those solutions include identifying our product owner to increase project success, mapping the offline customer journey to develop an online user-friendly experience, working with the stakeholder throughout our own process in order to get feedback, developing an MVP, and then iterating often, and then finally preparing for the launch of the new tool by communicating with the stakeholders about the process change. So our team will walk you through these solutions. My colleague Katie will walk through identifying a product owner as well as mapping the offline customer journey to an online user-friendly experience. My colleague Chris will be walking through solutions 3 through 4, seeking internal stakeholder input, as well as creating an MVP. And then finally, I'll be walking you through solution 5, preparing external stakeholders by communicating about the process change.
Great, thanks, Dawn. Okay, so the first solution that we identified was coming up with who would serve as the product owner on the unit team we were working with. As Dawn mentioned, the director wasn't going to be available throughout this entire project lifecycle to provide feedback or be present in all meetings. So identifying a product owner is really helpful to kind of have someone serve as that key liaison and stakeholder on the project. And what a project owner is someone who is your main point of contact throughout the entire project. They're making the final decisions, making approvals, and they'll be sending you any feedback from their team. So it's really important to have that, because when working with a team you don't know very well, it can be overwhelming if you're receiving feedback from multiple people on the team, or you don't really know whose feedback is more valued than someone else's. And so this way that they work to consolidate everything on their team and just deliver one unified voice to you and your team. So some best practices when identifying a product owner is making sure that you set expectations with them. When working or identifying one, maybe that person has never served that role before, so they're not clear on what it could entail, or if they've been a product owner, the role could be different on a project they've worked on previously with a different team. So just making sure that they understand everything about how that will function and what that exactly means for them and their team. Another important part about setting expectations with them is you can show them the timeline up front, letting them know when you'll need feedback throughout the entire project lifecycle, and letting them know that if maybe you don't reach certain deadlines of getting feedback or providing approvals, that could delay the project timeline. So again, just being super upfront and straightforward with them will help make sure that it's a smooth process and working with them is a positive experience. Something else that's important to do is making sure that you educate the product owner on the entire process of the project, so they understand what type of feedback that they should be giving throughout all phases. So if you're in the design phase, what kind of feedback you're looking for from them, or once you're in the development phase and you're showing them the staging site at what they're looking for, are you asking them to provide design feedback at that point in the project, or are you just looking for them to send you maybe issues or bugs that they see within the staging site? And so that way they really know what they should be looking for, and they kind of understand at what point in the project changes can be made, or at what point the designs are final and you can't really go back from here. So that also helps with the feedback process, so they know at what point in the project everything is happening. The next part that's important to discuss with them is, again, how they're providing feedback to you. You want to make sure that they are the sole voice who's providing you feedback. That way you're not having to consolidate feedback from multiple team members. Another beneficial aspect of having a project owner is that throughout all phases of the project, she was able to work with the director to gather his feedback and speak on behalf of him. She more regularly interacts with him, so it was kind of a natural process for her to work with him, and it was great for us because then we were able to make sure that he was able to see things throughout the entire project, and that when we showed him something maybe 3/4 of the way through, it wasn't a surprise what he was seeing, that he had been involved in every single phase. And another aspect of the project owner is that it's really important to get their feedback at every stage of the process so that they're comfortable with what you're moving forward with and that they signed off on it. That way you make sure you don't have to go back to design once you're already in development, or kind of go back on the process and it doesn't really make sense at one point, that they're fully involved so that everything is aligned and working throughout the entire project life cycle. The next thing we did with the product owner was we mapped the entire process from offline to online to see how that would translate. As Dawn mentioned, we weren't very familiar with the process when we first started this project, so we made sure during the discovery phase or the research phase of this project that we dedicated enough time to work with the product owner and their team to learn all the ins and outs of the process, including understanding how they usually process these applications and what the timeframes are and how they usually communicate with people, how they communicate with each other, what's involved in each step of the process. So that way when we were making design and development decisions, we were fully informed and not having to make any guesses at any point, so that when we were mapping it out, we were knowing exactly which step would correspond here, or which button would do this, and we fully understood everything going into that, which was super helpful. We also wanted to make sure the process was accurate everywhere. If they're communicating about the process in one place, we're communicating it the same way in our online tools so that what they had been currently doing offline was still accurate when we were moving it online. We also wanted to get buy-in on how this process change would be communicated to stakeholders so that when we've spent all this time building it out with them, that there was some sort of plan to inform stakeholders and there would be a smooth transition when this tool launched, so that it wasn't just out of the blue or stakeholders didn't know how to use it. So that was really important, discussing that with them at the very beginning of the project, so you just fully know how that's going to play out once you've launched the tool. The next thing to keep in mind when you're working with the team and you're deciding what information that you're going to translate from offline to online is how much information you're planning on sharing. So if the team was communicating status updates about the process manually before, asking how much information they were sharing with their customers, because if they're sharing exact timeframes, or they're saying, okay, if you're in this step and you're going to move to the next step in 5 days, is that going to be an exact time frame or is that approximate, and what can the customer expect? Because if we're sharing this information with them online, we want to make sure that it's going to exactly match their expectations and what the unit team was prepared to basically own up to. Like, is that time frame going to be exactly 5 days, or does sometimes it take 6 days? And so we wanted to make sure that we weren't being too visible with the process while still sharing enough information so that the information was still accurate with the users. Our next goal with working with the team and mapping the experience from offline to online was making sure that we were presenting the information in a clear, simple way. And at the beginning of the project, we collected all the requirements from the team, what information that they wanted to share online, from the offline to the online process, and did they want people to know about the whole process, or did they just want people to see the step that they're in and maybe not see any other information? And they did end up wanting to show the step that they were in as well as the full process as a whole, so people could see kind of what came before and what comes after. Since this isn't a process that people are generally familiar with, it's important to know everything. So we've provided kind of a rough wireframe that just has some lorem ipsum in it, so you can see an example of what it looks like. But we had to come up with some creative solutions to make sure that we weren't overwhelming the user with all this information, because it's an 8-step process, so there is a lot of information that could potentially overwhelm them. So we worked with the unit team closely to make decisions on how we would display that, and got their sign off on every point that to make sure that we were still achieving their goals and the requirements that we set out together, with still keeping to our best practices and design and UX and development best practices that we normally adhere to. So we came up with a really clean, simple way that people can view all this information, by tabbing through the different steps in the timeline, so that they can still see what was before and after them, but it's not visible all at the same time. So that was a solution we came up with there. And then I'll hand it off to Chris to talk about the next step.
So I'll be talking about seeking client input throughout the entire project lifecycle. The first part of this is probably the most obvious, constantly asking questions. We found that throughout this process, by us constantly asking our client questions, it sort of built trust, and since it was new for them to work with us, they felt more comfortable asking us questions about our process. So it was kind of like a win-win for everyone involved, including the entire team when sharing information whenever possible. As Katie and Dawn mentioned, we work directly with the director of this program, so it was kind of hard to get into his schedule. But when he was available, he would attend meetings with us, so he got to see the designs as they were being built out, and see our prototypes and staging site as we were building out the site. This was super helpful because it gave him the opportunity to ask his questions, and we didn't have to hear it through the product owner, which sort of sounds counter to what Katie said, but it gave us a mechanism for much quicker solutions to be communicated to the entire team. And then next, including the client and product owner, when you test, this was helpful for us, since this was an offline process and there was a certain way that information was being communicated to the end users, previously through email. We couldn't really get all that information in this new solution. This allowed the clients to see how the information would be presented on the website, since writing for the web is a little bit different than how you'd write an email or communicate otherwise. And then next, we created a minimum viable product, or MVP. So for those of you guys who aren't sort of familiar with this term, it's just a development technique in which you're creating a product that meets the minimum amount of requirements, and then just to sort of get it out there, and then as time goes by, you're able to iterate and enhance that product based on feedback you get, and also sort of your internal needs for the product. One of the most important parts about this is providing a mechanism for users to provide feedback. Before launch, this could be through, if you're able to do user testing, that's a great opportunity to get information. But if not, just writing like very thorough test scripts and having your internal team test the site. For us, we got the client or the product owner and the director to take a look and give us some helpful information. After launch, you can achieve feedback through a was this helpful, or sort of like feedback form. A lot of people use like 4C or SurveyMonkey. You can do the same thing. And then developing a plan to analyze the feedback you receive. So, a lot of the feedback we received was great feedback, but sometimes there's some like more opinionated stuff or subjective stuff. So, coming up with a way to sort of fish that stuff out and sort of maybe set that aside and focus on the more valuable feedback that you're going to use to help get to my next point, analyze or help enhance the product. So developing a plan to analyze the feedback and then actually executing how you want to make your product better. And then just continuing that process over and over again until you get to a point where the product's kind of mature and does what it's supposed to do, and all your users are happy with it. I'm going to hand it off to Dawn for our last point.
All right, thanks, Chris and Katie. So the previous 4 solutions that we implemented focused a lot about like how we interacted with the client, as well as like developing requirements so that we built a product that was intuitive for users and also like showed where customers were within the case process. The 5th and final best practice that we implemented was communicating to and preparing your stakeholders for the process change. And it's really important when building any new tool or moving an offline process to an online platform that you're not only thinking about how the tool will function, but how you'll communicate to your stakeholders about this new process change and how stakeholders can now use this tool. So throughout our process and our development process with the client, we asked a lot of questions about the tool and how it would be launched. So making sure that they were communicating to their stakeholders before and after the tool's launch, so stakeholders would be prepared to use this new process. And one thing that we did was ask a lot of questions, and those questions included who would be using the new process online. Would it be customers that were already in the application process, or would it be customers who would submit an application after the new self-service platform launched? Other questions that we asked them were, how would they receive their unique tracking ID number? Would they receive it in an email, and how would they be able to access it? And then finally, we also asked them, in addition to the customers that would be submitting an application and going through this like case process, what other external stakeholders needed to know about this new process so they could direct customers to this particular program. So while we were building the tool, those answers were finalized, and that helped us create a communications plan with the program unit. And the communications plan basically would inform stakeholders on this new tool, where they could access this new tool on the website, and also would walk them through how the process would work. And we worked with the program unit's strategic communications team in order to draft talking points. And then we also drafted social media and blog posts so that wherever the stakeholders found information from the program, whether that be on this particular website, social media, or with external associations that we work with, they would be informed about this new process change, when it was going to happen, and who it would apply to. And then finally, because we were moving an offline process online, it was really important that not only did we reflect the new process in the new tool, but also any materials related to the process had to reflect the new tool and how people would use it. So what our team did, we did an audit with the program unit to find out where they had housed information on this particular process, and then we provided recommendations alongside with the program unit on how to update that content so that it would reflect what information was available in the tool. And then once we had all of that recommended messaging and it was improved by the client, what we did was we worked with Katie to update the content on the program's website, and then we also work with some additional liaisons within this particular agency to update content that was located on other agency-affiliated web properties. All right, so that brings us to the conclusion of our presentation. Thank you all for attending, and we're happy to answer any questions that you may have on any of the best practices that we implemented or any other questions about how we work together as a team. Yes.
What steps did you guys take? I think you said that sometimes the product owner wasn't available to attend meetings. So what steps did you guys take to kind of keep them involved and make sure that you weren't ending up with delays if they did not attend?
So the question was, what steps did we take to make sure that the product owner was involved and that we were able to continue with our process and our timeline in order for the tool to be implemented? Katie, would you like to answer that question?
Sure. So within our timeline, we add a little bit of buffer time in each phase. Since working with different units in a federal agency, you never know what their schedules or response time is going to be. So we left enough time to be able to incorporate their feedback if needed, to push out the timeline a couple days here and there. So in the end, we were able to get their feedback in most parts moving forward. And if we weren't able to have an in-person meeting, we'd send them an email with the explanation and saying, can you take a look at this and give email feedback at least if we're not able to talk in person. But I would say when you're working with a federal agency, just leave time because you never know how long it might take.
Yes.
Yeah, when you're creating your MVP, because how do you determine how many features should actually go into that application?
The question was, when you're creating an MVP, how do you determine how many features that should be included? Chris, would you like to answer that question?
Sure. That's a good question. I mean, I think ultimately, I guess it's going to be up to what your client is most comfortable being, like the most bare bone version of your application. For us, like the most basic functionality that it had to provide was to just allow a user to log in and check the status. So, being able to see all the other steps, that was something that we could have, iterated at a later point. So yeah, I mean, it's just really like a sort of like an internal, like what your team's most comfortable with. Does it kind of answer your question? Yes and no, maybe.
No, it does.
Yeah.
I can add on to that too.
You wanna?
And then I guess at the beginning of the project, when you set up the requirements, if halfway through the design phase, they're like, oh, it'd be so cool if this tool did this would be awesome. And you're like, well, we've set this timeline and these are our baseline requirements to get a working product out the door. And you're like, why don't we see how users are reacting to this? And then we can build on this additional functionality that's a little bit more complex on top of the basic functionality that is meeting the requirements. So I think sometimes the internal team can make calls throughout and say, I think this might be more of a phase 2 item that we would iterate on after the launch. So you could do something like that as well. Did you have a question?
Did you have any scope creep, and if so, how did you handle it?
So the question was, did we have any scope creep and how do we handle it? I believe during the user acceptance testing and the demo, the program director, he had a few additional requests, but working with the product owner throughout the entire process and educating them about our own interactive process and also about the user acceptance testing and whatnot, we were able to make that decision to push back on the program director, and also we were able to bring back the goals and also what we were going to build for the MVP. So the request that came from the program director, we let him know that afterward we could discuss, after the tool had launched, we could discuss incorporating that at a later date, but bringing it back to the goals and also communicating to the program director that these new features that he requested weren't like essential to the MVP. So we were able to have that conversation, that difficult conversation with him, letting him know that this can be added to our product backlog and that this wasn't like a deal breaker to have the product launched. So we were still able to get client acceptance of the product, but also know that we could come back to that request later on and integrate it later.
In this particular project, did you go back and integrate any new features?
So the question was, did we go back and integrate any new features? No, we did not once we launched, but however, we've been looking at feedback and also looking at analytics to see like what improvements we could make. And so far, we've received very positive feedback from stakeholders about the product. I mean, they've said it's really intuitive and it has a great user experience. So we're always looking for feedback and on ways to improve the experience. So we've been like looking at analytics and also talking with this particular program unit to see if changes need to be made, what those changes will be, and how we'll prioritize.
Part of like the feedback we received is that like this is real helpful, and some of the actual users have suggested maybe we can apply this to like a another process or something. So it's sort of like while we haven't gone back and like made any iterations on this after launch, it's sort of created like new tools for us to think about in the future. So that is something that's kind of like it's in talks at this moment. So.
I was kind of interested in your communication between the product owner and the project director. I mean, did you explicitly include that in your timeline, or did that happen as a function of just the normal interaction between the director and the project owner?
Sure. So the question was how we communicated with the product owner as well as the director and how that was worked into the timeline. I think when we set up the expectations with the product owner, we gave them timelines for, we would like your feedback on this within 5 business days, and within that we asked them, who would be reviewing this? Do you think you'll be able to review this with the director in this time frame? And so we kind of put that internal review process on the product owner to handle on her end, as long as she got us the feedback by the date that we requested. So, and that seemed to work out throughout the project. The director works closely with this unit anyway, so it was kind of a natural process for her to be able to work with him throughout the project, whereas we don't really interact with him day to day quite as much. And being the product owner, all of his feedback usually would come through her unless we had an in-person meeting where everyone was kind of brainstorming and giving feedback together, and in those everyone gave feedback throughout. But yeah, I think it was just making sure that she knew that it would be best if he reviewed everything during each review cycle so that he wasn't surprised at the next phase or anything.
Are there any more questions? All right, well, thank you all for attending, and we'll be available to answer any additional questions that come to mind.